With the recent releases of The Abyss and True Lies now on physical media, I have recently gone back and watched all of James Cameron's filmography for the very first time. So today we're going to rank all of James Cameron's films that he's released up until this point, from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Zach, and I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch a movie without having to talk about it afterwards. If you find yourself the same way, you're in the right place. Consider hitting that subscribe button. While you're at it, join me down in the comment section below. Give me your ranking of all 9 of James Cameron's films from your least favorite to your favorite. With all that out of the way, let's get started. And easily coming in my last slot at number 9 is Piranha II The Spawning. So this is technically the very first movie in James Cameron's filmography, as his name is credited for the director of this film. But this isn't really a James Cameron movie. This is a sequel to Joe Dante's Piranha, and a producer wanted to extend this into a franchise, but he wanted to take over the movie himself, but the studio would not let him direct this movie. So this producer was given $500,000 as long as he went out and got an American director, which he did in James Cameron. For 5 days. James Cameron only shot on this film for approximately 5 days. Then he was removed by the producer, but there's stories that say, and James Cameron himself has said, that he would sneak into the editor's bay when this film was being assembled, trying to piece it together, make it more into something that he liked. But ultimately, even though his name pops up as director of this film, a lot of this is not his work. And I think that's pretty evident in the film itself, because while there are some good performances at times in this movie, and there are some shots and some kill sequences that truly do feel inspired and creative. But it definitely doesn't save this movie from being incredibly bloated with too many subplots and characters that you don't care about. Plus, the pacing is just abysmal in this one, with the killer piranhas barely having a presence in this film. In fact, you don't really even see one until about 40 minutes into the film, and the humor feels completely off and inconsistent. And when you take this dramatic acting by some of the cast and put it with this hokey flying killer piranha B-movie from the 80s, where it also tries to have some dramatic elements infused into it, it just does not all come together naturally. In fact, it doesn't all come together at all. And between all the schlock and silly kills, this movie is ultimately pretty boring as well. So while this may have the name James Cameron on it, it's wearing it like a badge. It definitely did not earn, and is not an accurate representation of what James Cameron is capable of. Next up, Avatar. Now, just to be clear, I like Avatar a lot more than I like Piranha II The Spawning, so there's a pretty big gap jumping from number 9 into number 8. But even with that said, Avatar feels like a rare case for James Cameron, where he seemed to go for style over substance. Now, there's no denying that when Avatar came out back in 2009, it was a technical marvel. I mean, this movie had audiences blown. I remember my dad and I trying so hard to get a ticket for this movie in 2009, because back in that day, you had to wait in line for tickets and actually find a seat when you got in there, and we could never get into the theater. It was always sold out. We could never find a seat. This thing took audiences by storm. With its technological advancements in CGI and 3D and motion capture work, this thing was a true spectacle of 2009. And it still looks pretty good today, especially on Blu-ray. But the biggest complaints that people have about Avatar that you hear nowadays is how it's just another ripoff of Pocahontas, Dances with Wolves, Fern Gully, The Last Samurai. And all of those are very valid complaints when it comes to Avatar. But that's never been my problem with Avatar. My problem with Avatar has always been that James Cameron never really seemed to get me that invested in the characters, in the conflicts, and in the story of this world on Pandora. While the world of Pandora is a beautiful setting to look at, and James Cameron does some really good work with the world building of Pandora, the characters here have always felt like archetypes of who they're supposed to be, stereotypes of the characters they are supposed to be, and in that way, I don't find the characters very interesting in Avatar, and I don't really get that invested in the military versus the Na'vi storyline that's set up on the world of Pandora. Now, that's not to say that James Cameron doesn't know how to make a good movie out of Avatar, because I do think Avatar is a good movie. In fact, the third act battle always gets my blood pumping when the Na'vi take on the military, because it is just James Cameron action galore, and it looks great and it's shot well. Even if I'm not entirely invested in the fight, I'm at least thoroughly entertained. But behind all of the advanced technology and the spectacle are characters and a story I find kind of bland. Staying on the world of Pandora, number 7, Avatar: The Way of Water. Now, much like its predecessor, this film feels like its intention and goal is to once again dazzle you with the effects and the 3D, which the film definitely does, because I am not someone who seeks out 3D films. I do not like 3D films in theaters. If I can avoid 3D, I will. I sought out Avatar: The Way of Water in 3D because I just knew from the first Avatar that James Cameron was going to deliver on the 3D experience, and that he did. Avatar: The Way of Water to this day is still the single best and most enjoyable movie I have ever watched in 3D in the theaters. But much like the first film, when you strip away the 3D, when you strip away the theatrical experience that Avatar: The Way of Water is, watching it at home and the movie being 3 hours long, the sequences where we're just kind of swimming in the waters of Pandora with our characters and marveling at the incredible motion capture and CGI work that they're doing. I mean, this thing is a true marvel of filmmaking. The story here, once again, not the most interesting to me. And now it's 3 hours long. Now, what puts this over the first Avatar is I do feel like James Cameron did better when it came to the characters and the story. I felt like with Jake and Neytiri getting kids, bringing their next generation involved in the conflicts and telling a story about family, friendship, community, I was more endeared to the characters and even to the world this time around than I was in the first film. And thus, when we get to the third act battle of this one with the Na'vi versus the military, I actually was more emotionally invested in what was going on than I was in the first film, and it was still a spectacle and James Cameron action galore that does make Avatar: The Way of Water, while the pacing still has issues like the first one does, and now we've got longer pacing to sit through, I find this one just a little bit more thematically characterized and story more fulfilling than Avatar. At number 6, True Lies. I have heard so much praise about True Lies as I've grown up as a film lover, and now that I've watched the movie myself, I definitely had a really good time with it, although it definitely wasn't exactly what I was expecting. Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a spy, keeping a secret from his wife as Jamie Lee Curtis, I thought was a lot of fun, and Arnold does a really great job in this film. I actually think it's one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's best performances that I've seen. He's funny, but he's also the action hero that we've seen Arnold be. He's able to blend the two worlds very well in this one. As well as Jamie Lee Curtis was awesome in this film, and surprisingly, the chemistry between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis I thought was electric. I thought they had great chemistry together. But the first half of this movie being Arnold thinking that his wife is cheating, only to catch that she's not cheating, and then kind of messing with her a bit using his spy resources, I thought was a little bit strange of a way to get Jamie Lee Curtis's character involved in the terrorist storyline that's going on with Arnold. But once we get into the back half of this film, it is filled with fantastic James Cameron shot action sequences of the 90s. In fact, it's got some of the best action sequences I've ever seen done from 90s action films. It is so much fun. It is so big and epic in scope, and the practical effects and the practical stunt work that's done in this film when it comes to the action, when it becomes a kind of standard Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie, but through the lens and the eye of James Cameron's direction, the two come together excellently and create a more than solid action flick from the 90s. Kicking off our top 5, The Abyss. I was honestly blown away by this movie. So blown away, I cannot believe that it only just came out on Blu-ray in the past couple months, because this movie is a spectacle in all of the best ways for a James Cameron film. It is so incredibly immersive with the underwater sequences. There are so many shots, and just the scope and scale of what they were able to pull off in 1989 had me just sitting there with my jaw aghast of how James Cameron and his team were able to pull this off when this looks mind-blowingly impressive for today's standards. On top of that, James Cameron does a really great job in this film of creating grounded characters, a cast ensemble that I actually really enjoyed spending time with as they were trapped in this underwater disaster film, and yet there's inclusions of aliens and sci-fi elements in this movie as well that James Cameron somehow made work. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say it worked 100% for me, because some of the alien sequences in this movie felt a little bit pointless to me in the theatrical cut. They kind of extend upon it in the special edition, and in the theatrical cuts, the alien inclusions, they just feel kind of odd and weird for the most part. But when this thing is a paranoid thriller underwater disaster movie with incredibly tense sequences and scenes that truly had me on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen next and how our characters were going to deal with it, I had a wonderful time watching The Abyss. I'm sad that it took me so long to watch it, but now that I've seen it, completely blown away. What a piece of filmmaking. At number 4, The Terminator. And now this is a real testament to just how great of a filmmaker James Cameron really is, because I love this movie, and it's at number 4. And this is James Cameron's real first movie. This came after Piranha II The Spawning, and this is what put him and Arnold Schwarzenegger on the map. And you can definitely see why this is the movie that did so. This is a masterclass in blending action and sci-fi and horror slasher films all together into one epic story. James Cameron just created such a immersive and thrilling and exciting film with this by keeping it also very simplistic with the cat and mouse chase between Sarah Connor and the Terminator that keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire time, but at the same time expanding the lore and exploring more of this world and going into the futuristic sequences at the right moments just to create more intrigue, but never losing sight of the focused plot of Sarah Connor, the Terminator. And speaking of the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger is so iconic in this role, and you can definitely see why this put him on the map, because he's phenomenal in this film. His performance as the unyielding, unstoppable cyborg is both menacing and memorable, showcasing his unique ability to blend physicality with screen presence. But the thing that really makes the Terminator shine and makes it so great is how tight and focused this script is, delivering a straightforward yet gripping narrative that even with all the sequels that have come after it, some being great, good to bleh and bad, the Terminator remains a powerful statement of how great of a filmmaker James Cameron is. It stands on its own, and it is a classic through and through for very good reasons. All evident when you watch the film itself, all these years later. Coming into our top 3, Titanic. Now, this is once again a testament to James Cameron's abilities, because I love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. And coming out nearly after a decade from The Abyss, James Cameron takes the underwater sequences of tension and drama and tragedy that he already masterfully executed in The Abyss, and he perfects them here with this tragic love story, anchoring the story between Jack and Rose, two lovers on the historic Titanic. James Cameron is very smart in how he's taken the already known knowledge that we have of what happens to the Titanic to place this sense of dread and this pit in your stomach for the entire film. And when James Cameron puts you in their place, showing you the awe and wonder that it was of being on the majestic Titanic, it just makes that feeling of the impending doom that much more intense to anticipate. because you just know the entire time you're watching these two fall in love and come together and fight against the social class judgments and societal rules, that when the ship does hit the iceberg and it does start to sink and go down in the back half of the film and the horror begins, Cameron captures the scope and scale of this tragedy and the horror being experienced by its residents, but without ever losing sight of how true of an event this was and still is for people. Thus, he always goes back and anchors it back to Jack and Rose. And through this, James Cameron is able to accurately depict the tragic, horrific events that happened on the Titanic while keeping it respectful and honoring those that lost their lives in this historic event, while simultaneously being able to create a true blockbuster film that's meant to entertain and definitely does. Our runner-up, Aliens, and once again, a testament to James Cameron because I love this movie. And it comes in at number 2. Now, Alien by Ridley Scott is already a classic in the horror genre. And I think the brilliance of Aliens that James Cameron was able to do was take that horror genre that he already shows he understands with the Terminator, but James Cameron has also shown that he's a great action director. So to take those two worlds and blend them together with Aliens, what can I say that hasn't been said about Aliens already? The story goes that James Cameron walked into the pitch meeting with the executives, wrote Alien on the board, added an S, and put a $sign through it, and that was how this movie was greenlit and began. And that was just the start of James Cameron's genius when it comes to this film. Cameron manages to keep the suspense and tension with the xenomorphs that Ridley Scott excellently executed in Alien, but filter it through his eye of action that keep the DNA of the xenomorph scenes from Alien intact while making them more exciting and thrilling in the sequel. There's also a lot more of them. That helps too. On top of that, James Cameron takes the character of Ellen Ripley and elevates her into an action hero with this film without ever losing the grounding of her feminine maternity with the introduction of Newt, and given Ripley, a young child, that she is a mother figure to, that she is trying to protect from the xenomorphs this time around in this, makes her character not just more interesting, not just more compassionate, not just more sympathetic, but allows for Sigourney Weaver to dig deeper into the character of Ripley, let us know the character of Ripley even more, and in a lack of a better word, just makes her more endearing. And on top of all of those great elements of Aliens, you got great action sequences with military men and women going up against the xenomorphs. What else can you say about this film? Aliens is awesome. That brings us to number 1, and that is going to be Terminator 2. T2, one of the most beloved, highly praised action sequels, action movies in general of all time. Many people credit this as the greatest action film ever made, and I don't know if I want to go that far necessarily, but what I will say is it's one of the most entertaining films ever made. And there's a lot about T2 that's been said that could be said already. What I will say about this particular experience, watching James Cameron's filmography from his very first to his last in chronological order for the very first time, was when I hit T2, it was really fascinating to see how all of the elements from the previous films of James Cameron came together to make this iconic masterpiece. Taking the groundbreaking CGI of the water technical creature in the abyss and applying that to the villain, the T-1000, making him an even more unstoppable force than Arnold was in the first film, just really worked to up the stakes, that even though you're kind of retreading old water from the first film, only this time a Terminator is going after another Terminator who's trying to protect Sarah Connor's kid. Ultimately, it's still a cat and mouse chase, but by adding this element and this technologically new development in filmmaking, it just makes the whole thing work that much more. And similarly to Aliens, taking the character of Sarah Connor, who was a more weak and more damsel in distress character in the first Terminator, and turning her into this commanding action hero, much like he did with Ripley in Alien, and makes her a symbol of resilience and maternal strength. It elevates the character of Sarah Connor just like Ripley was elevated in Aliens, and makes her so much more iconic and so much more interesting and fascinating of a character that you just want to learn more about. And of course, James Cameron's brilliance in a lot of his films of combining sci-fi with fantastic, exciting action sequences. Taking the high concept idea of time travel and AI-driven machines wrapped in explosive chase sequences, brutal shootouts, and emotional stakes, it's not just sci-fi for sci-fi's sake. All of the sci-fi elements contribute to the story that he's still able to keep grounded with relatable characters, with intriguing ideas, and exploring this world and its lore even more. Plus, taking Arnold's natural charisma with the Terminator and flipping it on the audience's heads by making him the protagonist and the hero this time around is easily one of the smartest decisions ever made in filmmaking, in movies in general. The Terminator was already a classic and already so great that it's hard to believe that he could have made something even better. And not only did he make something better than the Terminator, but he made arguably his magnum opus. This is some people's favorite James Cameron movie, and it just so happens that it's mine as well. It's a masterclass of the man's filmmaking, and it comes in at number 1. If you like this type of video, I got another director ranking right over there with Zack Snyder. If you like watching movies and talking about them, I just went and saw Beetlejuice. You can check out the review down there as well. Don't just watch movies, talk movies. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.